Hi everyone. This is our 13th week of social distance schooling and our last one. I'm happy about it and I'm a little sad. For our last book, I decided we're going to reread Martin's Big Words. This is really important because there's a lot of stuff going on right now in the world that is not good stuff. It's very sad and upsetting, but it's really important that we talk about it and remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. We read about him back in January, and he had a dream. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing for you. You guys can watch that on video. I'll put a link in our reading for this week of watching his speech, but it's really worth watching. And before we go over the story, I'm going to preview some of the vocabulary because these are really important words and I want you to remember them. Hopefully you will remember, but let's go over a few of them. Before we start, it's written by Doreen Rappaport, illustrated by Brian Collier. This type of story is called a biography. That means it's a story about someone. When someone writes a story about themselves, it's called an autobiography. But when someone writes a story about someone else, it's just called a biography. So this is a biography because the story, it is a true telling of the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. These things all did happen. So let's talk about some of the vocabulary. One of the first words you're going to hear is hymns. Hymns are religious songs usually sung at church. Preach. To preach means to give a prepared talk to a group of people. Usually it happens to be in church. It's something called a sermon. So the minister, that's the person who gives the sermon, who's preaching to the people in the congregation. The congregation means the group of people who are gathered together. Again, it's usually at a church. Some of you might know the word priest. Priest does the same sort of thing. Or a rabbi. A rabbi is a Jewish person who talks to the congregation in a synagogue. Dr. King's dad was a minister, and he became a minister himself, just like his father. So he became the person who preached to the people in the church. Nation is another word for country. Separate. Separate means to take apart. In the story, they were talking about how black children and white children actually went to separate schools. There were restaurants that black people could not go to. They had to go to a separate restaurant. There were separate bathrooms for black people and white people. Can you imagine that? It's shocking, but that's the way it used to be a long time ago. So to separate means to move apart, but in this case, it has to do with separating people because they didn't look the same. Arrested. Arrested means you are put in jail for breaking a law. In this story, a lady named Rosa Parks was arrested because she decided that she was too tired to stand up on the bus when a white man told her to move because he wanted to sit down. And she finally said in her mind, I've had enough with being told that I can't sit where I want to sit because a white person wants to sit there. So she said, no, I'm not going to move. And she was arrested. That led to something really important. You'll hear about that in the story. Blistering. They were talking about the blistering heat that they decided not to take the bus because of what happened to Mrs. Parks. So they walked to work, they walked to church, they walked to school in the rain and in the blistering heat. So the heat was so hot that it actually made blisters on their skin. Courage. Courage is another word for bravery. Dr. Martin Luther King was filled with courage, and he gave courage to a lot of other people, even when they were very frightened. Rights. Rights are things that all people are allowed to do or have. For example, it's our right to an education. Every child in the United States is allowed to go to school. That's not a right in every country. There are countries in the world where girls aren't allowed to go to school. Can you imagine that? So rights are things that we value. It means we hold them dear. We really want to have them. And one of the rights that Dr. King was fighting for was equality. That means people should be treated equally, not because of the way they look, not because of their skin color or because of their gender, not because they're a lady or a man. People should be treated equally. They should be treated based on the way they act, not on how they look. So that's what a big part of the story is about, rights. Segregation. Segregation has to do with separate. The schools where children were separated were segregated schools. That means the children, the black children went to one school and the white children went to a different school. Thankfully, segregation is not allowed. It's against the law. You can't separate people, and luckily we now all go to school together, which is a good thing. Admired means liked. If you admire someone, it means you appreciate what they do, and what they do is usually something good. So you like them because they are doing good things for other people. And the last word down here is strike. A strike is when employees, those are the people who work somewhere, when they decide to stop doing their job because something is not fair at their work and they want to change the way things are done at their job. So at the end of the story, we read about Dr. Martin Luther King helping out the garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee. They were striking because they realized that the black garbage collectors were doing the same job as the white garbage collectors, but they weren't being paid the same amount of money. The black garbage collectors were getting less money. They were working just as hard, but they weren't getting equal pay. So that's not fair. So they decided to go on strike, and they stopped picking up the garbage. And you can imagine what would happen if they stopped doing the job. So those are the words. I hope you will be able to follow along in the story. Make sure you listen to the story a few times. And if you need to, go back, listen to this again, and please talk about the story with your parents. I'm going to let someone else read the story for you this week. I don't have my copy of the book with me. That's why I don't have a picture of it. But you guys know what it looks like. We've read it before. So listen to it again and talk with your families about what's going on in our own city and in the country right now. All right. Thanks. Bye.